Go.
Good morning. The sermon this morning is from the Gospel reading of Matthew, chapter 15, beginning in the 21st verse. Let me reprise it for you. Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him, crying out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy upon me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly." Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, "Send her away. She keeps crying after us." And he answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." The woman came and knelt before him. "Lord, help me," she said. And he replied, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." "Yes, Lord," she said. "Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." And then Jesus said to her, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed at that moment. As I was doing research on this, one of the first questions that occurred to me was, leaving that place, what place was he leaving? This was shortly after he had withdrawn up to Galilee. He had been followed by Pharisees and scribes who wanted to expose him for allowing his disciples to break with tradition. They ate bread without first cleansing their hands, washing their hands. And Jesus managed to confound the Pharisees and the scribes by pointing out that while his disciples might be violating tradition, their traditions were actually violating the law. There was a tradition that said that if you gave money to the temple, then you no longer had to honor your mother and father. And he said, better to follow the law than to follow the tradition. So the Pharisees were kind of upset with him at this point. He goes further north up towards Tyre and Sidon. This is the area that would today be like Lebanon and Syria. So he's getting well away from Jerusalem, well away from the Jewish lands. He's being followed now by a woman, although in the book of Mark, chapter 7, where this same incident is told to us, we hear that he's actually gone into a house in this area, and he's trying to lay low, as it were. He doesn't want to advertise his presence, but people hear about him anyway, and the woman comes to the house. So regardless, this woman is imploring for help. She is apparently a Canaanite. The Canaanites were not Jewish. These were the people that, in fact, the Jews were supposed to slaughter all of them when they came into Canaan. So these are people who are possibly more despised than the Samaritans. The Samaritans being, from the Jewish perspective, a heretical offshoot of Judaism. The Samaritans, from their own perspective, they were the pure Jews, and they were the ones who kept to the law. But this woman is a Canaanite, probably a pagan, probably a worshiper of Astarte, one of the female gods of Canaan. Jesus, by the way, does distinguish between the Gentiles and the Samaritans. This woman would be a Gentile. In Matthew 10, verses 5 and 6, Jesus tells his disciples, "Do not go in the way of the Gentiles, and do not enter any city of the Samaritans, but rather go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." So we've got the Gentiles, we've got the Samaritans, we've got the lost sheep of the house of Israel. This woman is one of the Gentiles. Now Jesus, having come to earth, having been incarnated, had a mission. And his initial mission is to the house of Israel. He is the Messiah, the son of David, the expected king who has come to to redeem and to save Israel. So it's not altogether surprising that he would say that his first job is to deal with the house of Israel before he begins to deal with the Gentiles and the others. What I find interesting in this story is the reaction and the action of the disciples. Now, they've just seen him humiliate the Pharisees. And by the way, they continue to be completely clueless, because when Jesus says to the Pharisees, and again, this is just before this incident, that it's not what goes into a man's mouth that defiles him, but what comes out of a man's mouth that defiles him. The disciples pull him aside and say, "What does that mean?" And Jesus, basically, if I could modernize it, looks at them and says, "Really? You still don't get it? You don't understand this?" So he was dealing with a fairly clueless bunch at that time. And now here's this woman who is crying after them, "Lord, help me. Lord, help me." And all the disciples see is someone who's making a scene. God, Jesus, send her away. She keeps shouting. I mean, it's good. It's so embarrassing. Please, get rid of her. I'll be honest, I'm not sure whether this is before or after the disciples also had the brilliant idea of sending away the children, because they were a pain in the neck. And Jesus had to reprimand them on that as well and say, "Let the children come to me." They were interested in themselves. They were self-centered. They were interested in their relationship to Jesus without seeing the bigger picture. And here is this woman, not even a Jew, not even a Samaritan, a full-blown pagan, coming to Jesus and crying out for help. "Send her away, send her away. She keeps shouting after us." Now, the scripture tells us that Jesus answered. He answered the disciples. He told the disciples, "I was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Paralleling, by the way, what was back in Matthew chapter 10, where he told them that their mission was to go out to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now, I think that it's possible that Jesus at this point was trying to bring out, to make explicit, to put right in front of the disciples what they were secretly thinking. Why is this woman bothering us? She's not even one of the lost sheep. Send her away. Well, you got a point. I was only sent for the lost sheep of Israel. He hasn't spoken to the woman yet. He hasn't told her yes or no. He hasn't told her go away. He has allowed her to continue to cry out. And so after he says this to the disciples, the woman then comes and continues to implore him. The gospel here tells us in Matthew that she knelt before him. In Mark it says that she threw herself on the floor in front of him and implored him and said, "Lord, help me." At which point Jesus looks at her. Now have the image here. She's on the floor. She's on all fours in front of him. She's in the position of a dog in front of him. And Jesus takes advantage of the image that is in front of him and says, it's not, and again, this is back in Mark, there's a little bit more than in Matthew. He says, it's not right to feed the dogs before we feed the children. Notice that he doesn't say it's not right to feed the dogs. He's talking about the sequence. We take care of the children first, and then we take care of the dogs. Now, I've read a couple of commentators who say that the word that Jesus uses here for dog is a very specific word, and it refers either to puppies or to lap dogs, as opposed to feral dogs running wild in the streets. So he's really saying it's not right to feed the pets before we feed the children. And the woman, you gotta love the woman. She's focused. She knows what she wants. She wants her daughter to be delivered of a demon. There's no point in arguing with Jesus. There's no point in getting up on her high horse and saying, "What do you mean I'm a dog?" In fact, Jesus didn't even call her a dog. Jesus made an observation. You feed the children before you feed the dogs. She grasped that. She owned being a dog. She'd already humbled herself in front of Jesus. And she said, "Yes, Lord. It's not right to feed the dogs before you feed the children. But even when you're feeding the children, crumbs fall from the table, and the dogs get the crumbs." And she's affirming here the power of the mercy of Jesus. She doesn't need a meal like the children. She needs the crumbs. And this will deliver her daughter. And Jesus looks at her. Now, remember, he's spoken to his disciples and said, "What's with you guys? Don't you get it? Do I have to explain everything to you?" And here's this Canaanite woman who gets it. And he looks at her and he says, "Woman, your faith is great. Your request is granted. Daughter is healed." By the way, daughter never appears in the story. She's off stage through the whole thing. We never actually see what her problem, her condition is. We never actually see the healing. But we're told at that moment that the daughter is healed. So now, I gather, I take away from this story a few things. Number one, the dogs are entitled to the crumbs. Our dogs at home know this because anything that hits the floor automatically becomes dachshund property. The dogs are entitled to the crumbs. In the same way, by the way, that the poor are entitled to the gleanings from the field. It's basically the same concept. You know, what you weren't able to consume yourself, what fell to the ground, let it be for someone else. Number two, the woman was focused on the objective, on what she wanted to accomplish, and that was to get deliverance for her daughter. And so she persisted. She cried out when she wasn't answered. She cried out when the disciples were telling Jesus, "Send her away." She threw herself at Jesus' feet. And when Jesus even indirectly compared her to a lap dog, she went with it. Fine, I'm a lap dog, but even lap dogs get the crumbs. The final thing that I take away from this, and that I want you all to take away from this, is the reaction of the disciples. Here they were, supposedly in relationship with Jesus, and all they could think about was their relationship with Jesus. Now, good for them that they had a relationship with Jesus. We all should have that. But they were missing the point. The point of the relationship with Jesus is not to have a relationship with Jesus. It's not to say, "I'm Jesus' friend, Jesus is my friend." Good for me. It is to take the love of Jesus and transmit it to others. We are to be imitators of Jesus and not followers only. Otherwise, we're not fulfilling our mission. How many times have you felt embarrassed by someone who was in need and was crying out and saying, Lord, help me. Lord, help me. And I will confess, there have been times for me when I just wished that Jesus would send those people away. Come on, I'm trying to worship here. Get them out of here. We should be listening to what people are saying. The disciples weren't listening to what the woman was saying. They just heard a bunch of noise and wanted the noise dismissed. Jesus heard what the woman was saying. Jesus responded, and her daughter was healed. So the next time any of us is in a situation where we maybe feel a bit embarrassed by someone who's in need, remember that Jesus wants us to be like him and not like the disciples in this story. Here endeth the sermon.
Amen.